Sometimes heartbreak doesn't thunder into our lives. It seeps in like a shadow at dusk, subtle yet impossible to ignore. It doesn't always announce itself with explosive endings or public meltdowns. Sometimes it simply drifts between people who once laughed together, who once shared easy camaraderie, until one day the air between them feels heavy, different. For Kelly Clarkson, Blake Shelton, and Gwen Stefani, three of the most beloved figures in modern music, heartbreak didn't arrive as scandal or betrayal. It came quietly, wrapped in the glow of studio lights and the applause of millions, hidden behind smiles that television cameras could never truly interpret. Their story, played out before millions on The Voice, was never just about music or competition. It was about the fragile human threads that connect fame, friendship, and emotion. It was about how love, loss, and loyalty can coexist under relentless public scrutiny, and how even laughter on national television can disguise the ache of a breaking heart. By the late 2010s, The Voice was more than just another TV show. It had become a cultural ritual, a weekly gathering where audiences not only discovered new talent but tuned in to witness the chemistry, the teasing, the unspoken affection among its star coaches. Blake Shelton, with his Oklahoma drawl and country charm, had long been the show's steady anchor. He was the cowboy who could roast a co-star with a grin, then turn around and deliver heartfelt mentorship to a young singer chasing their dream. His humor masked depth, the kind that comes from both triumph and loss. Then there was Gwen Stefani. Radiant, stylish, unfiltered, her presence a mix of California sunshine and quiet wisdom. She had walked through her own storms, rebuilt herself, and somehow still glowed with authenticity. And into this already electric mix came Kelly Clarkson, powerhouse vocalist, pop rock rebel, and heart-on-sleeve empath. When she joined as a coach in 2018, she brought with her an unmatched sense of realness. Viewers didn't just watch Kelly, they felt her. But what most people didn't realize was that behind the jokes and performances, something much deeper was unfolding among these three friends. A silent narrative written not in headlines but in shared glances, small gestures, and the invisible tension of shifting emotional tides. Kelly's arrival coincided with a turning point in her own life. Professionally, she was unstoppable. Multiple Grammys, hit talk shows, global tours. But personally, her world was beginning to tremble. Her marriage, once a symbol of stability, was fraying beneath the pressures of fame and time. By 2020, her divorce would become public. A heartbreak lived under flashing cameras. Yet, even as her private life unraveled, Kelly showed up to set every week, smiling, mentoring, laughing. She was, as fans often said, the emotional compass of the show, and perhaps the one most in need of her own compass at that time. Meanwhile, Blake and Gwen's love story blossomed. It began innocently, two friends sharing the unique loneliness of divorce and the unpredictable comfort of connection. By 2015, their relationship was public, their bond the beating heart of The Voice. To the outside world, it was a fairy tale. Inside that brightly lit stage, it was more complicated. Because friendship, especially one forged under lights and lenses, demands balance. And Kelly, now facing her own emotional collapse, stood between two friends whose joy mirrored everything she had lost. But she didn't retreat. She didn't distance herself. Instead, she cheered them on. Publicly, earnestly, and with a grace that spoke volumes about who she truly was. It wasn't the kind of heartbreak tabloids loved to sell. There were no betrayals, no cold wars. It was quieter than that, more human, the heartbreak of witnessing happiness you once believed would last forever, but no longer yours to hold. Off camera, the trio's connection was genuine, filled with care, humor, and mutual respect. Blake had known Kelly long before Gwen joined the show. Their friendship was deep, almost sibling-like. He teased her mercilessly but also protected her fiercely. When Kelly's pain became too visible for the media to resist, Blake often redirected the spotlight, diffusing gossip with good humor or heartfelt deflection. Gwen, too, understood more than anyone realized. She had lived her own heartbreak in the public eye and knew the discipline it took to smile for cameras while your soul stitched itself back together. When she spoke about kindness, integrity, and emotional honesty, it wasn't performative. It was personal, and Kelly absorbed it all with quiet strength. Even when social media framed her as the third wheel, she refused to feed that narrative. Instead, she continued to call Blake and Gwen my rocks. That phrase wasn't just PR polish, it was truth. Because sometimes love and loss coexist. Sometimes friendship is the bridge between joy and grief. And sometimes the purest form of love is letting others shine, even while standing in your own shadow. The voice became their shared therapy, not by design, but by fate. Week after week, they mentored young artists about passion, pain, and perseverance, lessons they were living themselves. When Kelly spoke to a contestant about resilience, she wasn't just talking about music. She was reminding herself. When Blake laughed, when Gwen smiled across the red chairs, they weren't just putting on a show, they were holding each other steady through life's transitions. And though millions watched their banter and competition, very few saw what was truly happening. 3 artists navigating heartbreak, healing, and hope, all while making the world believe it was just another season of a TV show. As 2023 approached, the balance began to shift again. Blake, the last original coach standing, announced his departure after 23 seasons. The stage that had witnessed a decade of friendship, rivalry, and emotional evolution would never look the same again. When Kelly stood on that stage and said, "You made this place safe for broken hearts," the world applauded. But those who knew the history, the quiet ache behind the smiles, understood it was more than a farewell. It was gratitude. It was closure. It was Kelly's acknowledgement of a shared journey, one that began with lighthearted teasing and ended in emotional rebirth. Because beneath the glamour, the gossip, and the glitter of fame, there was always something much more real. 3 human beings teaching the world that even under the heaviest lights, hearts still break quietly, and heal quietly too. The stage lights on The Voice never really dimmed. They only shifted, softened, or changed color. And for Kelly Clarkson, those lights became both her armor and her confession booth. Every performance she witnessed, every tear she wiped from a contestant's cheek, reminded her that music had always been the safest place for a broken heart to hide. By 2019, The Voice had evolved into something much more profound for its coaches, a shared space where art and life intertwined. Between rehearsals and performances, behind the jokes and competitive banter, there was something deeper taking root, a quiet sanctuary where 3 people, each carrying the weight of personal trials, found solace in each other's presence. Blake Shelton, with his laid-back grin and teasing one-liners, was often the first to break tension. His humor wasn't just for laughs, it was a balm. The kind of humor that comes from someone who's lived through the hard stuff and learned that laughter, sometimes, is the only way to keep from falling apart. Gwen Stefani, luminous and introspective, carried her own kind of strength, the kind that's born from rebuilding yourself after loss. Having gone through her own public heartbreak years earlier, she recognized the quiet signals of pain that others tried to mask. And Kelly, open, sincere, and endlessly resilient, was the one who tried to hold everyone together, even when her own world was fracturing behind the scenes. Kelly's divorce was not the tabloid spectacle people expected. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was, instead, painfully human. The unraveling of years spent building a life with someone you once believed would always be there. When she filed for divorce in 2020, the world reacted with a mix of shock and curiosity. But Kelly's response wasn't defiance, it was grace. She continued to show up smiling for the contestants, laughing with Blake, complimenting Gwen, even as her private heartbreak echoed in the silences between commercial breaks. People saw her poise, her professionalism, her laughter, but few noticed the subtle tremor in her voice when she spoke about love and loss on her talk show. or the way she occasionally paused just a second too long before switching to a brighter tone. Yet, in that vulnerability lay her strength. Kelly wasn't pretending to be okay. She was choosing to keep moving, to find meaning through music, friendship, and empathy. For Blake and Gwen, watching Kelly's resilience stirred memories of their own journeys. Both had known heartbreak intimately. Both had walked through the same fires that Kelly was now navigating. Blake, especially, felt a deep connection to her struggle. Years earlier, he had gone through a divorce that left him questioning everything: his purpose, his music, even his sense of identity. He once said that heartbreak doesn't destroy you. It refines you. It strips away the noise until only truth remains. Watching Kelly face her own pain reminded him of that truth, that healing isn't linear and strength isn't loud. Gwen, too, saw reflections of herself in Kelly's quiet courage. Her own transformation, from heartbreak to rediscovery, from grief to love again, had taught her the value of empathy. She admired how Kelly could celebrate their happiness without resentment, how she could cheer for love even when hers had faded. And perhaps that's what made their dynamic so special. It wasn't built on shared success, but shared survival. There's a moment that fans of The Voice often recall, one that never made the headlines. During rehearsals, Kelly was sitting in her red chair, quiet, thoughtful. Blake, noticing her stillness, cracked a joke, something about her being too serious for a country girl. She laughed, rolled her eyes, but didn't respond right away. Then she said softly, "Sometimes it's just hard to keep smiling, you know?" The room went silent for a moment. Gwen reached over and squeezed her hand. It was small, invisible to most, but in that second, something real happened. The cameras might have been rolling, but what they captured wasn't performance. It was friendship. Raw, unscripted, and profoundly human. Moments like these became the soul of The Voice. While millions watched contestants chase dreams, behind the scenes, 3 coaches were quietly learning to heal. As the seasons rolled on, Kelly transformed her pain into art. She began writing again, songs that hinted at release, forgiveness, and rediscovery. In interviews, she spoke about reclaiming joy and learning to breathe again. Blake, ever the supportive friend, became her biggest cheerleader on and off the show, when tabloids tried to pit them against each other, turning coaching rivalries into imagined feuds. Blake shut it down every time. "Kelly's family," he'd say. "She's one of the strongest people I know. And Gwen?" She balanced grace and authenticity with her characteristic warmth. In her posts and interviews, she never spoke of tension or distance, only admiration. "Kelly's got a light," she once said. "Even when she's hurting, you feel it. She turns it into something beautiful." But perhaps the most touching part of their story wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't say. There were no dramatic confrontations or teary confessions. Instead, there was understanding, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken. A shared glance before a performance, a hand on the shoulder, a quiet, "You okay?" whispered backstage. In a world that thrives on spectacle, their friendship remained understated, yet profoundly powerful. Kelly's heartbreak became a bridge, not a barrier. It deepened her empathy, refined her artistry, and connected her more deeply to the people around her. Blake's humor became her shelter. Gwen's calm became her mirror. And together, they created an emotional balance that transcended fame, gossip, and competition. It was, in essence, a quiet act of love, the kind that heals rather than wounds. When Blake announced in 2023 that he would be leaving The Voice, it hit harder than anyone expected. After 23 seasons, his presence had become the heartbeat of the show. For Kelly, it wasn't just a co-star's farewell. It felt like the closing of a personal chapter. During his final episode, the audience cheered. The lights glowed warmer. And Kelly, fighting tears, said words that carried the weight of everything they had endured together. "You made this place safe for broken hearts." To the casual viewer, it sounded like a sweet goodbye. But to those who knew the deeper story, The heartbreaks, the healing, the quiet kindness. It was something else entirely. It was gratitude, spoken in its purest form, because Blake really had created that space. For Kelly, for Gwen, for himself. A space where people could be imperfect, where hearts could break and still belong. In the months that followed, Kelly continued to reflect on that chapter. Her interviews were filled with newfound clarity about resilience, self-worth, and the beauty of moving forward. Gwen and Blake, now married, often spoke with affection about their years on the show, always including Kelly in that reflection. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They were companions through a shared emotional odyssey, each carrying a piece of the other's story. And maybe that's the quiet lesson beneath it all. That heartbreak, when faced with grace and empathy, doesn't destroy connection. It deepens it. That true friendship isn't about choosing sides, but standing beside. And that love, in all its forms, doesn't vanish. It simply transforms. Fame is a strange kind of mirror. It magnifies everything. Love, pain, laughter, until even the smallest emotion feels colossal. Under those lights, the world doesn't just see you. It interprets you, often getting it wrong. And for Kelly Clarkson, Blake Shelton, and Gwen Stefani, the voice wasn't just a workplace, it was a microscope. Every smile was dissected. Every glance was analyzed. Every silence became a story. To the audience, they were glamorous, perfectly composed, endlessly charming. But behind that sheen was something rarely spoken of. The emotional cost of living in a world where your heartache isn't private. It's entertainment. Kelly Clarkson understood that burden better than anyone. From the moment she won American Idol, she'd been living in the public gaze. At first, it felt exhilarating. A dream come true. But dreams come with fine print. Fame has a way of slowly erasing the line between public image and private truth. And when Kelly's marriage began to collapse, that line disappeared entirely. She wasn't just grieving the loss of love. She was grieving the loss of privacy. Every headline turned her heartbreak into content. Every comment speculated about her emotions. Every photo was analyzed for signs of strength or weakness. Yet, amidst the chaos, Kelly made a choice, not to hide, but to redefine vulnerability. She spoke openly, not about gossip, but about healing, about the courage it takes to rebuild when the world is watching. Her honesty wasn't defiance. It was liberation, and somehow, in doing so, she gave permission to millions of viewers, people who had never met her, to feel their own pain without shame. Blake Shelton, on the other hand, had always been the rock, the good-natured cowboy who seemed untouched by the storms around him. But even rocks crack when the waves keep coming. His public persona, the easygoing humor, the confidence, the laid-back Southern charm, was real, but it wasn't the whole picture. Beneath it was a man who had known heartbreak and understood what it meant to rebuild yourself under the harsh glare of fame. When Kelly's world began to crumble, Blake quietly stepped into a role few noticed. He became her shield, not through grand gestures or emotional speeches, but through small, consistent acts of loyalty. Deflecting intrusive questions in interviews, shifting conversations when tabloids tried to provoke tension, standing beside her on that stage, not as a savior, but as a friend who simply refused to look away. It was his own quiet rebellion against the machinery of fame, a declaration that even in an industry obsessed with spectacle, decency still mattered. Gwen Stefani, meanwhile, was living a duality of her own. Her love story with Blake had become one of the most celebrated romances in pop culture. The world adored them, their laughter, their harmony, their unshakable bond. But Gwen knew the other side of that coin. She had lived through the disintegration of a marriage under the same unforgiving spotlight that now illuminated her joy. She understood that even happiness can be complicated when others' pain surrounds it. And so, while she basked in love, she carried empathy like a quiet duty. Gwen never flaunted her relationship. She honored it. She made space for Kelly, for the nuances of friendship that fame often erases. In interviews, when reporters tried to stir rivalry, she redirected with warmth. "Kelly's incredible," she'd say. "She's been through so much, and she's still shining." That was the thing about Gwen. She didn't compete for light. She shared it. The three of them, Kelly, Blake, and Gwen, found themselves bound by something far stronger than television contracts or music careers. They were united by experience, by the understanding that even success doesn't shield you from heartbreak, by the recognition that strength isn't about pretending, it's about persevering. When the cameras rolled, they laughed. When they cut, they talked. And sometimes they just sat together, quiet, reflective, letting the silence say what words could not. The voice, over time, became something deeper for them. It wasn't merely a stage, it was a sanctuary, a place where they could transform their private battles into something meaningful, something healing, not just for themselves, but for everyone watching. Because when Kelly comforted a contestant crying over failure, she was really comforting a younger version of herself. When Blake reminded a nervous singer to have fun, he was reminding himself not to let the world steal joy. When Gwen told an artist to sing with truth, she was repeating the very mantra that had carried her through heartbreak and back into love. It wasn't just a show anymore. It was therapy set to music. Yet, even in that healing space, the pressure of public perception never truly faded. Fans speculated endlessly about friendships, loyalties, rivalries. Tabloids turned every lighthearted moment into a headline. Kelly feels left out. Blake chooses Gwen over Kelly. Tension behind the voice. Each headline missed the truth that their connection wasn't fragile. It was resilient. Kelly didn't resent Blake and Gwen's happiness. She admired it. She said it herself in interviews. Their love is beautiful. It gives people hope. And that statement, simple, sincere, was the essence of who she was. By the time Blake announced his departure in the 2023, the voice had already become synonymous with his name. He was the anchor, the familiar laugh, the steady presence. For Kelly and Gwen, his exit was more than a professional shift. It was an emotional one. Kelly, ever the empath, expressed it best. "You made this place safe for broken hearts." That one line carried years of shared history. The laughter, the losses, the healing, the growth. It was her acknowledgement that what they'd built together wasn't just a show. It was a refuge. Blake, for his part, didn't try to hide his emotion. He spoke candidly about Kelly, calling her the realest person I've ever met, and about Gwen, the best thing that ever happened to me. And in that final season, beneath the jokes and the nostalgia, there was an undeniable tenderness, a mutual gratitude that transcended fame. When the curtain fell on that chapter, something remarkable remained. Not rivalry, not gossip, but legacy, a legacy of compassion, of empathy, of humanity in an industry that often forgets what that means. Kelly's strength had become a beacon for those navigating heartbreak. Blake's humor had become a reminder that healing can coexist with laughter. Gwen's integrity had become a quiet anthem for grace. Together, they had turned a primetime competition into a testament of endurance, proof that even under the harshest lights, people can choose kindness over competition, empathy over ego, and healing over headlines. And that's the real story. Not the one the cameras showed, but the one the heart remembers. Music has always been more than entertainment. It's memory. It's medicine. It's the language we use when words alone can't hold our pain. And for Kelly Clarkson, Blake Shelton, and Gwen Stefani, music became the quiet space where heartbreak could breathe, transform, and, finally, heal. For Kelly, melodies had always been confession. Long before she sat in the red chair, she'd been writing her heart into every song. The triumphs, the fractures, the unspoken feelings she was too proud to say aloud. But after her divorce, her music changed. It wasn't just about love lost. It was about identity found. When she stepped back into the studio after the separation, the sound was rawer, stripped of pretense. Her voice, that unmistakable thunder wrapped in velvet, carried both strength and surrender. Listeners could feel the ache beneath the lyrics, the exhaustion of someone who'd survived not by avoiding pain, but by walking straight through it. She once said in an interview, "I don't write songs to move on. I write them to make sense of why I can't." That's what her post-divorce music became. Not closure, but clarity. Meanwhile, Blake Shelton was undergoing his own quiet evolution. To the world, Blake was the country star who had it all: fame, love, laughter, and a voice that could turn even heartache into comfort. But behind the cowboy grin, there was reflection. Decades in the spotlight had taught him that even joy needs grounding, and that the truest songs are the ones born from lived experience. In private, he often credited Kelly and Gwen for helping him stay balanced during his later years on The Voice. Kelly's candor had a way of cutting through Hollywood noise. Gwen's serenity reminded him to appreciate stillness in a world that moved too fast, and it showed in his music. His songs began to shift, from rowdy anthems to introspective ballads. They weren't about beer or backroads anymore. They were about belonging, about gratitude, about the delicate peace that comes after you've already weathered your storms. When asked about the inspiration behind one of his quieter tracks, Blake smiled and said, "You know you've healed when your music sounds less like heartbreak and more like home." Then there was Gwen, the artist who had turned reinvention into an art form. From ska punk frontwoman to solo pop icon, from heartbreak survivor to symbol of resilience, Gwen had always worn transformation with style. But her later years on The Voice revealed a softer strength, one that came not from reinvention, but from acceptance. Her music during that period carried an aura of peace. Songs that once vibrated with rebellion now hummed with reflection. Her lyrics shifted from questioning love to cherishing it, not as perfection, but as partnership. Gwen often described writing music with Blake as like breathing with someone who already knows your rhythm. That statement wasn't just romantic, it was revealing. For Gwen, music had become the connective tissue between her past and her present, between loss and renewal, and in that creative exchange, Kelly found comfort too. Despite their very different worlds, Gwen's glam rock roots and Kelly's pop country soul, there was a mutual respect that transcended style. They both knew what it meant to sing through pain, to stand on stage while your heart trembled beneath the spotlight. Over the seasons, The Voice became their shared studio of the soul. Contestants thought they were learning about harmony and stage presence, but the real lessons were quieter, about emotional honesty, about turning scars into songs. Kelly encouraged contestants to sing like no one was judging. Gwen urged them to be authentic even when vulnerable. Blake told them that imperfection was where the soul lived. Each was, in their own way, teaching the wisdom they had bled for. When Kelly performed on stage between episodes, you could feel it, that electricity that happens when pain and purpose finally merge. Her eyes closed, her hand clutching the microphone like a lifeline, her voice trembling between power and ache. Viewers saw performance. Blake and Gwen saw healing. Behind the scenes, they'd often linger after filming. Sometimes they talked about songwriting. Other times they just shared stories, the kind that never made it to interviews, about loss, about parenting, about trying to stay grounded when fame keeps pulling you off balance. Those nights, when the studio was quiet and the cameras gone, the real show began. Not one of competition, but connection. The therapeutic nature of their bond didn't go unnoticed by fans either. Viewers began to sense that what was happening on The Voice wasn't scripted warmth. It was lived empathy. Kelly's moments of encouragement weren't TV sound bites. They were lived philosophy. Blake's jokes weren't distractions. They were coping mechanisms. And Gwen's calm, graceful energy wasn't performance. It was perspective. Together, they turned a talent show into an emotional mirror, and in doing so, they reminded the world that even celebrities, even people with awards, mansions, and magazine covers. Hurt just like everyone else. But more importantly, they reminded us that healing isn't a private act. It's communal. Their evolution also mirrored something larger about the human experience, the way we grow through shared vulnerability. When Kelly spoke about her pain, fans who'd endured heartbreak felt seen. When Gwen celebrated love, it gave others permission to hope again. When Blake joked through sadness, people learned that humor doesn't mean denial. It means endurance. Through music and mentorship, the trio became symbols of emotional intelligence, showing that healing isn't linear, and it's okay to feel joy even when parts of you still ache. Perhaps that's why the voice felt different in those final years. It wasn't just about competition anymore. It was about connection, about finding the courage to sing, even when your heart wasn't steady. And in that sense, Kelly, Blake, and Gwen weren't just coaches. They were living proof that even after life falls apart, there's beauty in rebuilding. When Blake's final episode aired, the closing moments weren't grand or theatrical. They were quiet, just as their shared story had always been. The camera panned across the coaches' chairs one last time. Gwen's eyes shimmered. Kelly's smile wavered. Blake, trying to mask the emotion, cracked one last joke, but everyone could hear the catch in his voice. Then came Kelly's parting words, gentle but heavy with truth. "You made this place safe for broken hearts." The audience cheered, unaware that this line carried the weight of years, of unseen tears, late-night talks, laughter through pain, and songs that saved them all in different ways. It wasn't just a goodbye to a show. It was the closing verse of a long, unfinished song. One written by three hearts that had learned how to heal in harmony. Their story wasn't about rivalry or celebrity drama. It was about the power of music as a mirror, reflecting not perfection, but humanity. Because beneath the noise of fame, there's a silence only music can fill. And sometimes the most beautiful songs are born not from joy, but from survival. For Kelly, Blake, and Gwen, the voice was never just a show. It was a symphony of empathy, a living testament that even when life takes everything apart, melody can piece you back together. And long after the stage lights faded, that song, their song, kept echoing quietly in the hearts of millions who had found a piece of themselves within it. In the glare of fame, silence is dangerous. It invites interpretation. And when the world doesn't understand your quiet, it fills it with noise. For Kelly Clarkson, Blake Shelton, and Gwen Stefani, that noise came in headlines. Sharp, sensational, and wrong. The tabloids loved their triangle. It sold too well not to. Tension behind the scenes. Kelly left out of Blake and Gwen's world. Secret feud on The Voice. Each headline wrote its own fiction, twisting kindness into rivalry, support into jealousy, and humanity into gossip. But what the public didn't see, what the cameras never caught, were the moments that told the real story, the quiet ones, the ones without hashtags or breaking news. When Kelly's divorce made waves online, Gwen reached out privately, not as a co-star, but as a woman who had survived her own storm. She sent words, not sympathy, understanding. Blake, protective as ever, refused to let producers or press bait him into commentary. Kelly's family, he'd repeat, simple, final. And Kelly, she did what only she could. She turned the pain into art and the rumors into silence. She never denied, never defended. She just kept showing up, smiling, laughing, mentoring, being. That was her rebellion. Calm in a culture addicted to chaos. Their friendship endured because it wasn't performative. It didn't need validation or explanation. It was built on something quieter, something the tabloids couldn't monetize. Mutual respect. Every time the world tried to pit them against each other, they responded not with statements, but with sincerity. A shared glance on set, a laugh during rehearsals, a kind word on air. And over time, the gossip faded. Not because it stopped being written, but because their truth spoke louder than any rumor. In an industry where egos collide and headlines hunt for heartbreak, they chose dignity, grace, emotional intelligence. Because while the world mistook their silence for distance, they knew the truth. Real friendship doesn't need to shout to be heard. It endures, quietly, consistently, even when the noise tries to drown it out. When the lights of the voice finally dimmed and the red chairs stopped spinning, something profound lingered. Not fame, not rivalry, but growth. The kind that only comes from walking through heartbreak and coming out softer, wiser, more whole. Kelly Clarkson stepped into a new era of her life with a calm kind of courage. No longer defined by loss, she began shaping her world with intention. Her talk show, her music, her motherhood. She spoke often of peace, of learning to live without performing emotional strength. Her songs became lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because she had learned to live beside it. Healing, she once said, doesn't mean forgetting. It means building again, differently. Blake Shelton, too, found balance in simplicity. After years under studio lights, he returned to his roots. The land, the stillness, the things that never demanded applause. His laughter remained, but it carried new weight. Behind it was gratitude. For love found, friendships kept, and the strange beauty of endings that lead to peace. He called it the best chapter. Not because it was easy, but because it was earned. And Gwen Stefani, luminous as ever, continued to be the thread between the past and the present. Her life with Blake became less about spectacle and more about stillness. The glamour softened, replaced by something richer, serenity. She balanced family, faith, and creativity with the grace of someone who'd already met chaos and refused to invite it back. Each carried something from their shared journey. Kelly's empathy, Blake's steadiness, Gwen's grace. Their friendship no longer lived on the same stage, but it didn't fade. It evolved into quiet check-ins, private laughter, unspoken gratitude. And maybe that's what made their story timeless. 3 lives once bound by fame, now connected by something far more enduring, the simple, steady truth that heartbreak isn't the end of the song, it's just the pause before the next verse begins. Legacies aren't built from trophies or ratings. They're built from impact, from the way a single moment, a single word, lingers in the hearts of those who witnessed it. And long after Kelly Clarkson, Blake Shelton, and Gwen Stefani stepped away from the voice stage, their legacy remained, etched not in headlines, but in the quiet courage of the artists they inspired. Each contestant who once stood trembling beneath those lights remembered how Kelly looked them in the eye and said, "Your story matters." It wasn't advice, it was validation. She taught them that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was their greatest strength. Blake, with his effortless humor and steady warmth, taught another kind of lesson, that kindness can command a room louder than ego ever could. Contestants often said his laughter felt like home, his mentorship like a friend's shoulder disguised as a handshake, and Gwen, graceful, reflective, endlessly sincere, showed them the beauty of staying true to oneself, even when the world demands reinvention. She reminded young artists that authenticity doesn't fade. It evolves. Together, they changed the soul of the voice. What was once a competition became a classroom in empathy, a stage where resilience mattered as much as range, and emotional truth scored higher than technique. The dynamic they built, playful, profound, and deeply human, continues to echo through the show's new generations. Coaches still quote their words, contestants still mention their guidance, and audiences still feel their imprint in the show's DNA. But perhaps their greatest contribution wasn't musical at all. It was emotional. They normalized softness in an industry obsessed with strength. They made it acceptable to break, to rebuild, to keep singing anyway, and that is the quiet, lasting power of their legacy. Proof that even after heartbreak, even after the spotlight fades, what endures is not the applause, but the authenticity you leave behind. When the applause fades and the lights dim, what remains isn't the noise. It's the connection, the unspoken gratitude between people who shared something real, even when the world thought it was just television. For Kelly Clarkson, Blake Shelton, and Gwen Stefani, The Voice was never simply a career milestone. It was a chapter in their lives that revealed who they were beneath the fame. Three souls learning how to heal, how to forgive, and how to keep singing when the song of life changed its key. Years later, when fans look back at old episodes, what they'll remember most aren't the contestants or the scores. They'll remember the laughter that filled the room after a long day of filming, the way Kelly's smile softened when Blake cracked a joke she'd heard 100 times, the way Gwen's eyes glistened when Kelly spoke about resilience. Because The Voice was never just about finding the next star, it was about reminding the world that even stars can break, and that there's beauty in that breaking. Kelly found strength in vulnerability, transforming heartbreak into art, pain into melody. Blake discovered peace in stillness, realizing that laughter isn't escape, it's endurance. Gwen rediscovered grace, choosing love and empathy over spectacle. Their friendship, once played out beneath 1,000 lights, now lives quietly, in text messages, in small check-ins, in songs that still carry traces of shared history. It's a friendship no longer defined by proximity, but by permanence, and in a world that glorifies drama, their story remains a rare counterpoint, a reminder that grace can be louder than gossip, that love can exist without romance, and that healing often happens not in grand gestures, but in quiet consistency. They each walked away from that stage changed, not because fame reshaped them, but because empathy refined them. And in doing so, they left behind something the world doesn't see enough of: evidence that genuine kindness can survive fame's sharp edges. So when the credits roll and the music fades, one truth lingers. Beneath the glitter, beneath the gossip, beneath the spotlight, the human heart still beats, still breaks, still mends, and sometimes it does so quietly, beautifully together. As the lights fade on this story of love, loss, and quiet resilience, one truth remains. Behind every spotlight is a heartbeat. Behind every song, a story of survival. If this journey moved you, if you found a piece of your own story within theirs, don't let it end here. Subscribe to stay with us for more untold stories of music, of humanity, of hearts that break and heal again. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that even in silence, there is strength. And comment below, what part of Kelly, Blake, and Gwen's story spoke to your heart? Because every voice matters. Every story deserves to be heard. And sometimes the quietest ones echo the longest.